It doesn't feel dramatic. That's the first thing you notice. There's no breakthrough moment. No sudden shift. No clear line between before and after. It doesn't arrive with intensity. It doesn't hit you in a way that demands your attention. In fact, if you weren't paying close enough attention, you might miss it entirely. You're sitting in a quiet moment. Nothing urgent is happening. No problem is waiting. No thought is pulling you somewhere else. The room is still. The air is calm. And for once, you're not trying to change anything about it. You're not reaching for your phone. You're not searching for something to think about. You're not adjusting the moment to make it feel different. You're just sitting. And at first, it feels like every other quiet moment you've had before. The same stillness. The same lack of stimulation. The same absence of anything demanding your attention. But then, something subtle becomes noticeable. You're not resisting it. That's the difference. You're not trying to leave. You're not waiting for something to happen. You're not interpreting the silence as something incomplete. You're just inside it. You shift slightly in your chair. Not because you're uncomfortable. Just because your body moves. And even that feels different. It's not an adjustment to escape the moment. It's just movement within it. You lean back. Let your shoulders drop. And for a moment, nothing changes. And that's exactly what makes it different. You're not expecting it to. You sit there longer. And your mind does what it always does. It offers something. A thought. A direction. A small suggestion. You could check something. You could do something. You could move. But this time, you don't follow it immediately. Not because you're forcing yourself not to. Because you don't feel the same urgency to. The thought appears, and then it passes. Like it doesn't have the same weight it used to. You notice that. And that's when it becomes clearer. You're not being pulled. That sentence lands quietly. But it changes everything. Because for a long time, that's what defined your experience. Something always pulling you. A thought. A reaction. An impulse. A subtle discomfort. Something that required a response. Something that moved you slightly out of the moment you were already in. And now, that pull isn't there in the same way. You stand. Walk slowly into the kitchen. Not because you need something. Just because you decide to move. You open a cabinet. Look inside. Close it again. And there's no underlying need behind it. No subtle attempt to create stimulation. It's just an action. You walk back slowly. Sit again. And the moment continues. Not reset. Not broken. Continuous. That's new. Because before, every small movement would have shifted the state. Pulled you out. Created a break. Now, it doesn't. You lean forward slightly. Elbows on your knees. And another layer appears. You don't feel like something is missing. That lands deeper than expected. Because this is where everything used to change. This is where the subtle restlessness would appear. The quiet urge to create movement. The sense that the moment wasn't enough as it was. But now, that isn't there in the same way. Not gone. Just quiet. You sit there longer. And your attention begins to settle differently. Not outward. Not searching. Just present. You notice your breathing. Not intentionally. It's just there. The rhythm of it. The way it moves without needing your attention. You don't focus on it. You just don't move away from it. You lean back slowly. And the realization begins to form. Not as a thought. As recognition. This is what stability actually feels like. Your jaw relaxes slightly. Because it doesn't feel like what you expected. It doesn't feel strong. It doesn't feel intense. It doesn't feel like something you have to hold on to. It feels quiet. But not empty. Steady. But not rigid. You sit there longer. And another thought appears. Not intrusive. Just clear. Nothing needs to happen right now. That sentence lands deeper than anything else. Because for the first time, it doesn't feel like something is missing. It feels like something is complete. You exhale slowly. The room unchanged. The silence the same. But your relationship to it is different now. Because now, you're not measuring the moment against something else. You're not comparing it. You're not evaluating it. You're inside it. Fully. And that is something you haven't felt in a long time. By midday, the difference becomes clearer. Not because something new appears. Because something old is missing. That constant, subtle layer that used to sit underneath everything you did. You move through your day normally. You pick something up. Put it down. Walk from one room to another. Sit. Stand. Nothing dramatic. Nothing different on the outside. But inside, something isn't there in the same way. That quiet pressure. That almost invisible tension that used to guide everything. You don't feel it now. At first, it's hard to notice. Because it was never obvious. It wasn't stress. It wasn't anxiety. It was something more precise. A kind of internal grip. You sit down. Lean forward slightly. Elbows resting on your knees. And now, you can see it. You were always holding yourself in a certain place. Not consciously. Not intentionally. But constantly. You think about it more clearly. Even in calm, there was always something underneath. A small adjustment. A quiet correction. A subtle monitoring of how you were feeling. You weren't just sitting in the moment. You were checking it. Measuring it. Keeping it within a certain range. Not too restless. Not too flat. Not too disconnected. Just stable enough. You lean back slowly. And the realization sharpens. You were never just calm. You were maintaining calm. That lands deeper than expected. Because it explains something you never questioned. Why even peaceful moments still felt slightly effortful. Why stillness never felt completely natural. Why there was always a faint sense of holding it together. You sit there longer. And now, that layer isn't active. You're not adjusting your thoughts. You're not redirecting your attention. You're not pulling yourself back into the moment. You're just in it. You notice a thought appear. Something simple. Something familiar. You should probably do something. Before, that would have carried weight. It would have felt like instruction. Like something you needed to respond to. Now, it feels different. It feels like an option. And you don't follow it immediately. Not because you're resisting it. Because there's no pressure behind it. That's new. You lean forward slightly. Hands loosely clasped. And another layer becomes visible. You're not holding yourself together. That sentence lands quietly. But it removes something fundamental. Because for a long time, that's exactly what it felt like. Even when nothing was wrong. Even when everything was fine. There was always a subtle sense that if you didn't stay aware, something might slip. Something might shift. Something might feel off. So you stayed slightly engaged. Slightly alert. Slightly involved in maintaining your own state. You stand. Walk slowly into the kitchen. Open a drawer. Close it again. The movement is simple. But now it's clean. There's no second layer behind it. No hidden intention. No quiet effort to change how you feel. It's just movement. You walk back. Sit again. And the difference becomes undeniable. You're not checking yourself the way you used to. That lands deeper than anything before. Because this was constant. You were always aware of yourself. Not in a reflective way. In a controlling way. Monitoring your thoughts. Adjusting your reactions. Making sure you stayed okay. Even when there was nothing to fix. You lean back slowly. And now, that's gone. Not forced away. Not solved. Just, not active. You sit there longer. And your attention doesn't move inward to manage anything. It just rests. That's when the truth becomes clear. You were always adjusting something, even when nothing was wrong. That sentence lands hard. Because it reveals the pattern completely. You weren't responding to problems. You were preempting them. Correcting before anything drifted. Stabilizing before anything changed. Holding yourself in a version that felt acceptable. But now, you're not doing that. You let a thought pass without correcting it. You let a feeling exist without adjusting it. You let the moment stay without shaping it. And nothing falls apart. You lean forward again. Elbows on your knees. And the final layer sharpens. You were never meant to hold yourself together. That sentence lands deeper than everything else. Because it removes the entire structure. The idea that your state required effort. That your stability depended on you maintaining it. That if you didn't stay aware, you would lose it. You sit there longer. The room quiet. And something becomes undeniable. Nothing is slipping. Nothing is drifting. Nothing needs to be corrected. Because nothing was unstable to begin with. You exhale slowly. And the realization settles in fully. You're not stable because you're controlling yourself. You're stable, because you've stopped trying to evening arrives quietly. Not as a shift. Not as a contrast. Just, a continuation. The day doesn't feel like it needs to end in any particular way. There's no sense of wrapping things up. No internal pressure to reflect. No need to organize what just happened. No urgency to make meaning out of it. It just moves into something softer. You sit down again. The same chair. The same room. The same stillness. But this time, it doesn't feel like something separate from you. It feels like something you're already inside. That difference is small. Almost invisible. But it changes everything. You don't pause to adjust. You don't check how you feel. You don't scan for anything missing. You just sit. And for a moment, nothing stands out. No thought pulls you. No sensation demands attention. No urge rises strongly enough to shift you. And that's when something becomes clear. Not as a thought. As an absence. There's nothing to fix. You lean back slightly. Let your body settle into the chair. And the realization begins to form. Not sharply. Gradually. There was never anything wrong with the moment. That sentence lands quietly. But it expands quickly. Because now, it connects backward. To every quiet moment that felt slightly off. Slightly incomplete. Slightly unstable. You can feel them now. Not as separate memories. As one repeating pattern. A room. A pause. A stretch of silence. A moment where nothing urgent was happening. And almost immediately, something in you would move. A thought. A reach. A correction. A tiny internal shift that made the moment feel like it needed help. At the time, it felt reasonable. It felt normal. It felt like you were responding to something real. But now, sitting here, not doing that, you can finally see it differently. Those moments didn't fail. You changed them. Your chest softened slightly. Because that sentence doesn't accuse. It reveals. You didn't experience instability because something was broken. You experienced it because something kept interrupting what was already working. That is harder to sit with. Because it removes the old explanation. You were never waiting for the moment to become enough. It already was. You just never let it continue long enough to prove that. You lean forward slightly. Elbows on your knees. And the realization sharpens. You weren't unstable. You were interfering. That lands deeper than anything before it. Because it removes the last illusion. The idea that something inside you needed to be repaired. The idea that quiet meant deficiency. The idea that stillness was exposing a problem. No. Something simpler was happening. More uncomfortable. More honest. Every time a moment began to settle, you stepped in too early. Every time silence started becoming real, you interrupted it. Every time your state began to stabilize on its own, you assumed you needed to manage it. And in doing that, you became the disruption. You sit back slowly. And the pattern becomes undeniable. You didn't lose stability. You stepped out of it. Your jaw relaxes slightly. Because that sentence simplifies everything. Stability was never something you had to create. It was something you kept interrupting. That line goes through the whole architecture of the episode. All the checking. All the adjusting. All the little ways you monitored yourself. All the times you assumed something subtle needed correction. You thought you were protecting stability. But you were preventing it from finishing itself. You stand. Walk slowly into the kitchen. Open the fridge. Close it again. The movement is familiar. But now it feels different. There's no hidden reason behind it. No subtle attempt to change how you feel. No urge to create stimulation. It's just movement. You walk back slowly. Sit again. And that matters more than it seems. Because before, even simple actions carried a second layer. A quiet intention. A hidden correction. An effort to alter the state underneath the moment. Now, that layer isn't there. The action does not break the continuity. The moment continues. That's new. And because it continues, something else becomes visible. You don't need to hold yourself in place, because you were never falling apart. That lands heavy. Because it removes something fundamental. The belief that your internal state needed constant management. The assumption that if you didn't stay alert, something in you would drift too far. Go too flat. Too disconnected. Too undefined. So you stayed involved. Even in peace. Even in rest. Even in moments that asked nothing from you. Now, without that involvement, nothing collapses. Nothing slips. Nothing becomes dangerous. Nothing asks to be repaired. You sit there longer. The room quiet. And now another realization surfaces. Every time you thought something was missing, you were already stepping away from what was there. Your chest tightened slightly. Not from fear. From clarity. Because now, you can see it precisely. The moment would begin to settle. To stabilize. To become something real. And right at that point, you would move. Think. Adjust. Interrupt. Not because you had to. Because you were used to it. That habit used to feel invisible. Now it feels unmistakable. You can see the exact second it would begin. The moment before a thought becomes a distraction. The moment before a gesture becomes an exit. The moment before attention shifts from being inside the experience to managing it. And because you can see it now, you can see what it always cost. Continuity. The moment never got to remain itself. It always had to become something else to satisfy you. You lean forward again. Hands loosely clasped. And the realization completes itself. You weren't trying to fix the moment. You were preventing it from completing itself. That sentence lands clean. Because it explains everything without excess. Not every quiet moment needs to become profound. Not every silence needs to become meaningful. But every real moment needs one thing: time. Time to settle. Time to remain. Time to become itself before you step in and rename it as not enough. And that is exactly what you never gave it. You stand again. Walk toward the window. The outside is dark now. Still. Quiet. You look at your reflection faintly in the glass. And for a moment, there is no separation between what you see and what you feel. No adjustment. No interpretation. Just presence. You place your hand lightly against the glass. Feel the cool surface. And you don't move away. Not because you're trying to stay. Because there's no reason to leave. That may be the deepest shift of all. Not effort. Not discipline. Not control. Just the absence of exit. You walk back slowly. Sit again. And now the final layer becomes undeniable. Stability was never something you needed to build. It was something that remained when you stopped interrupting it. Your jaw relaxes completely. Because that sentence removes effort entirely. You're not achieving stability. You're not maintaining it. You're not protecting it from disruption. You're allowing it. Or more accurately, you're no longer breaking it. You sit there longer. The room quiet. The lamp steady. And for the first time, there is no question underneath the moment. No subtle uncertainty. No quiet need to check if everything is okay. It just is. You exhale slowly. And the final realization of this chapter settles in. Nothing was ever wrong with you. Nothing was missing from your moments. You were just stepping in too early, and breaking something that didn't need to be fixed. And now, for the first time, you're not doing that anymore. After that realization, something settles. Not because you did anything. Not because you figured something out. Because something stopped. That constant, quiet interference that used to sit underneath everything. It's not there in the same way anymore. You're sitting in the same space. The same room. The same kind of stillness. Nothing about the environment has changed. But now, there's no second layer running beneath it. No adjustment. No correction. No subtle attempt to keep the moment on track. You lean back slowly. And the absence of that effort becomes more noticeable. Not dramatic. But undeniable. You're not holding anything together. That sentence lands quietly. But it removes something fundamental. Because for a long time, that's what it felt like. Even in calm. Even in peace. Even when nothing was wrong. There was always a subtle sense that something needed to be maintained. That your state depended on you. That if you weren't careful, something would drift. Something would flatten. Something would become not quite right. So you stayed involved. You stayed aware. You stayed just slightly engaged in keeping everything where it should be. But now, that involvement isn't there. And nothing is drifting. Nothing is collapsing. Nothing is becoming unstable. You sit there longer. Letting that register fully. Because it contradicts something deep. The idea that stability requires effort. The belief that calm needs to be maintained. The assumption that if you don't stay aware, you'll lose it. You lean forward slightly. Elbows resting on your knees. And the realization sharpens. Stability isn't control. That line lands clean. Because it breaks the old definition immediately. Control requires effort. Control requires monitoring. Control requires you to stay involved. Stability doesn't. You don't have to check it. You don't have to reinforce it. You don't have to hold it in place. You just don't interrupt it. You sit there longer. And another layer becomes visible. Stability isn't something you maintain. It's something that remains when you stop interfering with it. That sentence lands deeper than expected. Because it removes the entire mechanism you thought you needed. You weren't building stability. You were working against it. You stand. Walk slowly across the room. The movement is simple. Unforced. There's no second thought behind it. No quiet evaluation of how you feel. No need to correct anything as you move. And nothing changes. The same steadiness remains. That's new. Because before, movement would have triggered adjustment. A quick check. A subtle shift. A small correction to stay centered. Now, there's no center to maintain. There's just continuity. You stop. Stand still for a moment. And notice something else. You're not watching yourself the way you used to. That lands quietly. But it explains everything. You were always aware of yourself. Not in a reflective way. In a controlling way. Observing. Monitoring. Making sure you were okay. Making sure nothing slipped. Making sure the moment stayed right. Now, that layer is gone. And nothing needs to replace it. You lean back against the wall. And the realization deepens. You were never meant to hold yourself together. That sentence lands heavy. Because it removes the last responsibility. The belief that your internal state was something fragile. Something that required constant attention. Something that depended on your effort to remain stable. But now, without that effort, everything is still here. You sit down again. The same chair. The same position. The same quiet. And there is no sense that anything needs to be added. No pressure to make the moment more meaningful. No urge to create depth. No need to turn this into something else. You just let it be. And for the first time, that doesn't feel like passivity. It feels like alignment. You lean forward slightly. Hands resting loosely together. And the final layer becomes clear. You didn't find stability. You didn't build it. You didn't create it. You just stopped interfering with what was already there. That lands deeper than anything else in this chapter. Because it reframes the entire journey. Nothing new was added. Nothing external changed. Nothing needed to be fixed. The only thing that shifted was your involvement. You stopped stepping in. You stopped correcting. You stopped assuming something needed your attention. And in that absence, something remained. Something that had always been there. You exhale slowly. The room quiet. The light steady. And now, there's no question left underneath the moment. No subtle doubt. No quiet need to check if everything is okay. Because nothing is being managed anymore. It just is. And that's when it becomes undeniable. This is what stability actually feels like. Not strong. Not intense. Not something you have to hold. Just something that remains when you stop trying to control it. The change doesn't feel like something new. It feels like something that no longer needs your help. That's the difference. Before, even when things were calm, there was always a quiet sense that you had to stay involved. Stay aware. Stay slightly engaged in how the moment was unfolding. Not actively. Not obviously. But just enough to keep things from drifting. Now, that involvement isn't there. And nothing is drifting. You sit in the same space. The same quiet. The same kind of moment that used to feel slightly unstable. And this time, you're not doing anything to keep it that way. You're not focusing. You're not grounding yourself. You're not reminding yourself to stay present. You're not managing your thoughts. You're not correcting your state. You're just, not stepping in. And that's when you notice something subtle. The moment holds on its own. That sentence lands quietly. But it changes how everything feels. Because for so long, you assumed the opposite. You assumed that if you weren't careful, if you didn't stay aware, if you didn't keep things in check, something would shift. Something would flatten. Something would become off. So you stayed involved. Even in calm. Even in peace. Even when nothing was wrong. But now, without that involvement, the moment doesn't collapse. It doesn't weaken. It doesn't lose anything. It stays exactly as it is. You lean back slightly. And your attention doesn't move inward to manage anything. It just rests. That's new. Because before, rest was never just rest. It was something you monitored. Something you maintained. Something you subtly adjusted to keep from slipping. Now, there's nothing to maintain. You sit there longer. And your mind begins to move. A thought appears. Random. Unimportant. And you don't respond to it. You don't need to. It doesn't carry weight. It doesn't pull you out of the moment. It just passes. And the moment continues. Unbroken. You notice that. Because that used to be the breaking point. A thought would appear, and your attention would follow it. Not dramatically. Just enough to shift you slightly out of where you were. Now, that doesn't happen in the same way. Not because you're controlling it. Because there's nothing in you that needs to follow it. You stand. Walk slowly across the room. Your body moves naturally. There's no hesitation. No internal check. No adjustment to stay in the moment. And yet, you are. You're not trying to stay. You're not reminding yourself. You're not doing anything to keep it. It just continues. That's when the deeper realization surfaces. You don't have to hold stability. It holds without you. That lands deeper than expected. Because it removes effort entirely. You don't have to maintain this state. You don't have to protect it. You don't have to reinforce it. You don't have to stay aware of it to keep it from disappearing. It doesn't depend on you. You sit down again. The same chair. The same position. The same quiet. And now, there's no sense that you might lose it. That fear isn't there. That subtle urgency to stay like this is gone. Because there's nothing to lose. Nothing is being created. Nothing is being held. Nothing is being sustained. It's just remaining. You lean forward slightly. Hands resting loosely together. And another layer becomes clear. You were never stabilizing yourself. You were interrupting what was already stable. That sentence lands clean. Because it completes the pattern. All the effort. All the awareness. All the subtle adjustments. They weren't creating stability. They were breaking it into pieces. Small interruptions. Small shifts. Small moments where you stepped out and then tried to step back in. Now, without those interruptions, there's nothing to rebuild. You sit there longer. The room quiet. The light steady. And your system doesn't reach. It doesn't search. It doesn't try to create something more. It just stays. And that's when something else becomes clear. You don't need to trust yourself to maintain this. Because you're not maintaining it. That lands deeper than anything else in this chapter. Because for a long time, that was the concern. If you stop managing, if you stop controlling, if you stop staying aware, what happens then? The answer is here. Nothing happens. Nothing breaks. Nothing collapses. Nothing needs to be fixed. Because nothing was unstable to begin with. You exhale slowly. And the final realization settles in. You don't have to hold this. You don't have to protect it. You don't have to keep it from slipping. Because it was never yours to hold. It was always there. You just had to stop interfering long enough to see that it stays, without you. The next day begins the same way. No shift. No difference you can point to. No moment where you think, something has changed. The light comes in the same way. The room holds the same quiet. The same kind of stillness is already there before you move. And for a moment, you don't move into it. You notice it. You sit on the edge of the bed. Not thinking about anything. Not preparing the day. Not stepping into a role. Just there. And immediately, the familiar pattern begins. The quiet suggestion, get up. Do something. Move. Create momentum. It's still there. That hasn't changed. It doesn't need to. But this time, you don't follow it right away. You stay. Just for a second longer. Then another. And nothing happens. Nothing becomes unclear. Nothing feels incomplete. Nothing asks for more. The moment doesn't collapse because you didn't step into it. It holds. You stand. Walk into the kitchen. Fill a glass with water. The sound is simple. Soft. Contained. Before, this is where something would have shifted. A reach. A thought. A small adjustment. Something to make the moment feel a little more alive. Now, you hear it differently. Not as background. As part of the moment itself. And you don't move away from it. You don't try to extend it. You don't try to make it meaningful. You just let it be. You take a sip. Set the glass down. And your mind begins to move again. Of course it does. A thought appears. You should check something. You should start something. You should move. And this time, you don't argue with it. You don't suppress it. You don't try to become someone who doesn't have those thoughts. You just don't follow it immediately. You stay. That's all. And that's enough. Because now there's something that wasn't there before. Space. A small gap between the moment and your reaction to it. And inside that gap, nothing is missing. You move through the morning slowly. Not intentionally. There's no decision to slow down. There's just no urgency pushing you forward. You sit. You stand. You walk. And none of it breaks the continuity. Nothing pulls you out. Nothing resets the moment. It just continues. That's new. Because before, every action created a shift. Every movement had a second layer behind it. A quiet attempt to change how things felt. Now, that layer isn't there. And nothing needs to replace it. You sit again later that day. The light softer now. The room familiar. And there's no sense that anything needs to happen next. No quiet pressure to find something. No subtle need to create direction. Just, the moment. And for the first time, that doesn't feel like a pause. It feels like something complete. You lean back slightly. And your body settles without you helping it. Your mind quiets without you managing it. Nothing is being held. Nothing is being guided. Nothing is being corrected. It just is. And that's when it becomes undeniable. There is nothing missing from this moment. That sentence lands deeper than anything before it. Because now, it's not an idea. It's not something you're trying to believe. It's something you can feel directly. Without effort. Without proof. Without needing to check if it's true. You reach for the light. Pause for a second. Not because you're unsure. Because you're aware of the moment itself. And in that pause, everything feels simple. There's nothing to add. Nothing to improve. Nothing to become. You turn off the light. The room goes quiet. But nothing feels empty in the darkness. If anything, it feels closer. More intact. Because for the first time, you're not stepping out of it. You're not interrupting it. You're not trying to shape it into something else. You're just remaining. And in that remaining, something becomes clear. Not suddenly. Not intensely. But completely. You didn't find stability. You didn't build it. You didn't fix yourself. You didn't change your life. You just stopped leaving. That lands last. And maybe deepest. Because it removes everything unnecessary. You didn't need more clarity. You didn't need more control. You didn't need more awareness. You didn't need to become someone else. You didn't need to fix anything. You just needed to stop stepping in every time something began to settle. You exhale slowly. And the final realization settles in fully. Nothing was ever missing. Nothing was ever broken. Nothing needed to be repaired. You were already here. You just kept stepping out. And now, for the first time, you're not.